Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this exclusive webinar on in-app advertising and children. Before we get started today, I want to get some of the basic housekeeping items out of the way. So you should see a questions window in the console of your GoToWebinar. Please use this window to type in any questions that you have as they come up. And we have somebody here on our side keeping track of these questions so that we can answer them at the end of the webinar. We will be recording this webinar, so if you have any colleagues who are not able to attend today, just send an email to webinars@smaato.com and we will get the recording over to you. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to our agenda. So today we will cover the App Store policies for both Google and Apple as they relate to protecting the privacy of child users. And then we'll talk about the impact of these policies to publishers as well as advertisers. And then we're going to close with a brief look at some upcoming regulatory changes that everybody should be keeping an eye on. At the end, we're going to have some designated Q&A time. So as we mentioned before, please type your questions into the questions window of the webinar console whenever you think of them. So to introduce your speakers for today's webinar, I am Angie Li, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Smaato, sitting in the Hamburg office in Germany. And also here with me today is Alain. Alain, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks Angie. I'm Alain Blankenburg-Schroeder. I'm the VP for Data Products here at Smaato, also in Hamburg. I'm in the product department, of course, and responsible for anything related to data and algorithmic.
Great. Thank you, Alain. I just want to mention before we dive into the content that the information that we'll present today in this webinar is for general purposes only, and it does not constitute any legal advice. So please consult with your legal counsel for specific advice on legal interpretations. Okay, so before we dive into it, Alain, can you give us a little bit of background?
Sure, Angie. So the most important part that you have to take care of is, of course, certain legislations. So, for example, Europe recently introduced the GDPR, which also has a big section about children. So the general term there, for example, is 16, but certain countries can choose to lower the age to 13. COPPA will be known to everybody. That's the US law that applies also to all US companies. This defines it currently at 13 and under. And of course, other countries have their own laws. So this is the most important part that you always have to take care first. Then, of course, beside countries and then the specific regulations, you have the app stores that have their rules on top of it. And today we're talking more specifically about them.
Great. So because of the changing legislation around the world and some of the items that Alain already mentioned, the app stores for Google and Apple are also changing to adapt to these privacy requirements. So we'll talk about that today. If we take a look at the Google Play Store, this year alone, we already saw some significant changes. So in May of 2019, Google announced a new set of policies regarding additional protection for child users of apps. We'll go over these changes throughout the webinar. So basically, they have set a deadline for compliance with these policies at September 1st, 2019, meaning that Android app developers not only need to apply these policies to new apps going forward, but they must also apply the policies to their existing apps as well. On the Apple side of the house, in June of 2019, Apple announced changes to their requirements for apps in their kids category. We'll also go over those as well. On the iOS, so basically for iOS, the deadline for apps to comply with the new rules would be sometime in early 2020. So Alain, can you tell us a little bit more about the specific requirements for both of these app stores?
Yeah, sure. So, of course, you have certain categories that they have the rules separated into. So general content, they have certain answers that you have to answer. Of course, ads, and that's where we are going to focus on today. data collection, the general privacy policies, and of course, legal compliance. But legal compliance, again, is not topic of this today's podcast. So the kids category is a slightly different from Apple. It concentrates that any app in the kids category should not include any third-party analytics or third-party advertising. It may also not transmit or collect any PII, but this is actually anyways given by law due to COPPA.
Okay, great. So we've covered at a high level the requirements on both the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store when it comes to protecting child users. But what are the impacts to app developers and publishers? What are the steps that they now need to take? Well, before we start talking about the impact of the new changes, let's talk a little bit about the age ratings. So age ratings are set by different rating authorities in different regions and countries throughout the world. So for instance, in North and South America, you have the ESRB, which is the Entertainment Software Ratings Board. In Europe, with the exception of Germany, you have the Pan-European Game Information. In Germany, you have the USK, which is an acronym for some very long German words that I won't attempt to pronounce. But essentially, for both Apple and Google Play stores, developers need to fill out a content questionnaire when they go to submit an app. So based on the responses to these questionnaires, the stores will assign the apps with an age rating. So in the case of Google Play, they use the age ratings set out by the various rating authorities that we just mentioned for whatever region the user is based in. So in some cases, these rating authorities would override the age rating granted to your app if they believe that the content of your app is more suited to a different age group. So the age ratings are first and foremost a guidance for parents on what is suitable for their kids, which affects the reach of the users that the app will get. But these ratings are also used by advertisers as a signal to whether this app would be brand safe for their campaigns. So if we look at the Apple App Store side, as we mentioned before, both app stores have a content questionnaire that influences the age rating of the app. But in the case of Apple, apps that are designed specifically for children ages 11 and younger belong in their kids category. Regardless of whether an app belongs in the kids category or not, iOS apps would still get their own age rating based on the content of the app and your responses to the questionnaire. So on the Apple side, it's not necessarily set by the standard rating authorities. So additionally, just because an app is not in the kids category, it doesn't mean that the app doesn't have kid users in the audience. So publishers should still take care to ensure that they are maintaining compliance with COPPA, GDPR, etc., even if the apps are not in the kids category or specifically designed for children.
So maybe coming over to the target age group, which is actually pretty separate from the content rating that you have. Of course, it's dependent on it. So let's take a view at the Apple's App Store again and the kids category. So after you rated your content that is in your app, you will be presented, in case you're suitable for it, with the option to apply for being listed in the kids category. So as you see here in the screenshot, you can even select here age 5 and under, age 6 to 8, and ages 9 to 11. This is being enabled because the rating that you made before was suitable for these kids. You don't have to apply for this. The Google Play Store has 3 high-level age groups. So again, Apple has the kids category or normal categories. Google Play has the 3 target age groups. You either design your app primarily for children under 13. Then you have to adhere the Design for Families policy, or your app is actually appealing to a mixed audience. So at the same time to children, but also adults, or it's specifically not designed for children. When you apply in the Google Play Store, you actually get a setting like this. So you can select very granularly which age groups you're applying for. Apps intended for anybody above 13 should not have any content that specifically appeals to children. So once you submitted it, you get your result like this in this screenshot here. This also here, if you look very deeply at it, you will see that it shows you the note that it could unintentionally appeal to children. Actually, you have the option to go into the settings here and select to have a notice in your App Store listing that explicitly states that it's not designed for children.
Okay, so to summarize what you've told us, for the different categories of audience age groups for the applications, you essentially have 3 different types of audience age groups. So in the first category, this is your app is designed for children, which means that for Google, you must follow the strictest rules outlined in the Google's families policy, including the use of a Google certified ad network to serve ads. For Apple, this means that you have to follow the requirements designated for the kids category. So take note here, though, that the definition of child varies by region and regulation, so it's an added nuance that you should be aware of. The second category is this mixed audience group. So this is where you have created an app that targets both adults and children as a target audience. So this means that you would need to use what is called a neutral age screen in your app to determine the age of the user so that you can ensure compliance with COPPA, GDPR, etc. Additionally, here for Google, publishers can only use ad networks that are not certified by Google to serve ads to adult users. So child users in this mixed audience category would still require the use of a certified ad network in order to be served ads. And then the last category is your app is only intended for adult users. So as we mentioned, there is a label that you can use on the Google side to indicate that this app is not meant for children. This doesn't necessarily mean that there's any inappropriate content. It just means that the target audience of your app is not children users. So, what is the difference between what we've talked about today? Content ratings, target age groups. It's a lot of information and it all sounds relatively similar. So let's break it down and try to simplify things. Content ratings are based on the app developer's responses to the content rating questionnaire we showed. So this basically sets the minimum required maturity level of the content in the app. In other words, this determines the minimum age that a user should be to use the app. It also helps to determine the next item, which is the age rating. Age ratings are determined a little bit differently based on which app store we're publishing in. So for Google Play, the age rating is determined by both the results from the content questionnaire and the independent rating authorities like IARC, ESRB, PEGI. I know these acronyms are getting really fun to keep track of. App developers, they might notice that their apps have different age ratings in different countries or regions. And this is due to the fact that basically different rating authorities have different bands of age ratings. For the Apple Store, the age rating is generated by Apple based on the app developer's responses to the content questionnaire. So you would notice if you go to the Apple Store that the age ratings don't necessarily match up with the standard rating authority rating system. For example, you might see 4+ as an age rating on the Apple Store instead of E for everyone. Then the last category is the target age group. So a target age group indicates the intended audience of the app. So for Google, developers would fill out this information in the Google Play console. And for Apple, developers would decide simply whether the app belongs in the kids category or not. The target age group alone does not determine whether a developer needs to adhere to any certain guidelines. Instead, developers actually need to think about whether the content of their app unintentionally appeals to children and whether they have any child users using the app, even if the app was not designed for children. But what does all of this mean in terms of monetization? How can publishers still offer advertising opportunities to monetize their apps while maintaining compliance?
So it boils down to basically this screenshot that you will see in the Google Play Store when you submit your app. So when you say that your target age groups are including children, and then go to the section of ads, you will actually be facing this exact screen here. So this is the case when you already said it's a mixed audience. This highlights here all ads in the app that is being shown to children must be suitable for them. So effectively, you need to limit the creative rating, the maximum content that is allowed in the creatives, in the advertising that is being shown. So Google Play certified ad networks do that on their own. You can also choose to implement an age screen, a neutral age screen, and filter out basically the children versus the non-children, and then apply these age ratings in the calls to the ad networks. So you see here below the option of saying yes, all ads are being suitable for children, or no, and you certify that you implemented this neutral age screen.
And for a lot of our listeners, I bet neutral age screen is a bit of a, what does neutral mean? So at least according to the FTC website, a neutral age screen is one that basically allows the users to enter their age accurately without leading them or pushing them towards a default answer. So, for example, the FTC website says that an example of something that is not considered a neutral age screen would be to simply have a checkbox that says, yes, I am over the age of 13. So it needs to not indicate or directly push users to say that they're already of the appropriate age. That being said, when it comes to serving ads, essentially, publishers have three options. Either one, you would ensure that all the ads shown to all the users of your app are suitable for children, regardless of if they're children or not, and you don't use any targeted or personalized advertisements, which essentially means there's no open market monetization available. And then you would be complying with all of the requirements of the Google Families policy and the Apple Kids category. Option 2 would be to utilize this neutral age screen we just mentioned to identify the age of each user and then comply with the COPPA and CCPA GDPR requirements and the App Store requirements for child users specifically. And then the third category would mean that you would change your target audience age group to being for adults, and you have to then ensure that none of the content in your app is unintentionally appealing to children. So this might mean going through the app and removing some of these elements, like, for example, a fluffy teddy bear icon or another element that would unintentionally be attracting children, even if the app was not designed for children.
So I think everybody is a bit confused by these options, and let's speak maybe about the real trade-offs that we have to make here, or better, the app publisher has to do here. So there are three dimensions effectively. It's the audience that you're attracting and the audience size in result. It's the monetization options that you have, and then it's the user experience that you can offer. So if you're effectively limiting your app to be really child-directed and child ads only, then it's, again, only non-personalized ads, which means the monetization options on the open market are effectively very limited. On the other hand, if you have a lot of direct deals, then this is maybe your sweet spot. You're covered because you can directly play out these ads that you have. So if you go to the other side, one step at least, and go for a mixed user base, the mixed audience, basically meaning you have kids and teens or adults and teens, you need to have this neutral age screen. This might feel a bit intrusive to the user experience in certain cases, so you have to be really careful how you do that and how to be compliant on the same site. This will give you more monetization options. At the end, of course, if you can only go to the open market, then your target audience that you want to attract is also mostly mature users. So to maximize your opportunities from a monetization standpoint, and the audience that you will need is actually the adult category and maybe the teens. So maybe to clarify that a bit, let's switch slightly the perspective to the advertiser's perspective. So there's two dimensions that mostly matter to them. Before, we already spoke about the app content rating that you first had. Then you had the target age group, the users that you attract. And lastly, that's the campaigns, the creatives that you allow on your inventory. So here we concentrate on the app content rating and the ad creative rating that you're allowing. So actually the sweet spot here from an open market perspective is the lower right. You're attracting the lowest age groups, or actually you're offering an age rating that is low, and advertisers take this as very, very brand safe. If your app is rated as 18 only and above, this doesn't look very brand safe to the advertiser. You can easily guess some examples that come to mind how this could not be brand safe. Of course, if you have kids, you have limited ad capabilities. So the more sophisticated ad capabilities are only available with teens and above. And this gives more opportunities to the advertisers with special buying behavior. So this is also giving a much larger monetization option here. And of course, there's still quite a few advertisers who don't diligently classify their ads. So many of them still need to introduce actually a rating process. So for them right now, it's an easier process to not have to do that. But of course, in the means now, we see that the advertisers need to pick up on that soon. But a bit more in the next category.
So we've talked a lot about the impact of these policies and requirements to publishers and app developers, and rightfully so, as they're going to have a lot to consider going forward. But the players in this industry are not isolated, and there's certainly an impact to advertisers as well. So let's start with the obvious. The impact to targeted advertising here based on categories of user audiences. So advertisers should bear in mind that these regulations determine the level of personalization allowed, meaning users age 0 to 12 under current COPPA regulations, for example, cannot receive any personalized or targeted advertisements, only generic ads. In this middle category, where we have the teen users, depending on local regulations, which vary country to country, they can receive targeted ads which don't contain any age-inappropriate content like alcohol, gambling, dating, etc. And then, of course, we have the adult users who are able to receive targeted ads provided that the standard requirements for user privacy are adhered to. So apart from those obvious impacts, such as how to determine whether an app is going to contain brand-safe content or how a brand should allocate campaign dollars based on the availability of targeted advertising, there is another implication for advertisers that many DSPs haven't considered yet. So how would publishers know whether the ads they plan to show in their apps are suitable for certain ages? Currently, advertisers can indicate the age rating of their creatives based on standard rating authorities like IARC and ESRB. However, this is being underutilized, as we're seeing in the industry right now. And going forward, publishers are going to need more and more to rely on advertisers and their DSPs to signal the age appropriateness of their ad creatives. So that means that advertisers should determine the age appropriateness of their content, of the creatives, and classify them in alignment with the QAG media rating outlined by OpenRTB standard. So the three categories are shown in this table on the screen, with value 1 meaning that the content in the creative is suitable for all audiences. Value 2 would indicate that the content in the creative is suitable for everyone over the age of 12, and value 3 meaning that it's only suitable for mature audiences. So something else to keep in mind is that publishers might start to send a maximum allowed QAG rating value, for example, for that specific request. So for instance, if the publisher knows that a specific user is 14 years old, then the publisher can indicate that he only wants creatives with a QAG media rating value of 1 or 2. So it's important going forward for DSPs and advertisers to begin to classify their creatives according to this media rating, and in order to facilitate smoother transactions with publishers.
So again, to maybe get to some awareness for the advertisers, why this is actually important and where the sweet spots are, let's take again the perspective of a publisher. So here, again, the content rating is very important for you. And then the ad content rating is also very important because that is your creatives, your ads that you want to play out. And to be honest, most of the ads are of course suitable for children because there's no violence in there, there's no special things in there or sexual content. But very often what we see is that these haven't been classified yet. So it's really, really important to do this in the future. But the publisher's perspective, again, is slightly different. They want the highest reach. They want the highest ad revenue potential. And that's why they very often want, of course, to include teens and kids into their target age groups. So from that perspective, again, the lower right here is the sweet spot of a publisher. But this means, again, that there will be a neutral age screen. They will request ads for teens. And then we should actually be able to offer them ads. Otherwise, these are lost opportunities.
So to sum it up, basically the important takeaway of the impact to advertisers here is to really start paying attention to classifying creatives according to the OpenRTB standard so that publishers can more easily understand whether the creatives fit their requirements. So, legislatively speaking, what's next on the horizon? We have a lot of upcoming or already recently implemented regulations. Taking a look at this timeline starting from the left, in October of 2019, the Cyberspace Administration of China regulated that children refers to minors under the age of 14. So for example, here's an example of where the definition of child is different from country to country. Basically, in these provisions, they regulate activities related to collecting, storing, using, transferring children's personal data through networks that are located on the territory of China. So there are a lot of requirements under this regulation, and you can find more information about this online. But on the American side of things, we have the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, and by January 1, 2020, this will be enacted. So under CCPA, going forward, minors that are under the age of 16 have to authorize the sale of their personal information. So businesses are going to need to ask consumers who live in California to verify whether they're at least 16 or older before they can begin selling any data. They've also expanded the definition of personal data to include a few more categories, and there's obviously long list of regulations here, but like we said, just providing some general information. And then in the UK, the Information Commissioner's Office has confirmed that by November 23rd of this year, so about a week from now, they will present their age-appropriate design code of practice to Parliament for approval. And so, assuming that nothing changes, there are no objections, this could go into effect as early as January 2020, but they would provide a grace period of up to a year. And one of the biggest things that are coming on the horizon soon that I think a lot of us are talking about and already aware of is COPPA 2.0. So basically, the bill has been introduced and is awaiting review, but the proposal here is to extend privacy protections to teenagers. So basically, to 13 to 15-year-olds. So that would mean that tech companies would not be allowed to collect their personal information without their prior consent. So those are some upcoming regulations to be aware of, some of the major ones, like we mentioned at the beginning. Of course, we don't want you guys to just take this as legal advice, so please ask your counsel for specific advice on these regulations. But it's important to keep track of these, keep tabs on these, as things could change.
So let's talk about the conclusion of all of this. So first, publishers must select a target age for all existing and new apps. For mixed age groups that you target, you need to utilize a neutral age screen in apps to separate out children from non-children and then apply certain specific rules to them. If you don't have this mixed group and looking into ad quality, then you first should look at the IAB categories to separate certain content out from the advertisements and then the age groups. Advertisers need to classify their creatives by age group, what is suitable, to maximize their reach. And lastly, apps with children users need to use Google certified ad networks in case of Google Play Store. But for non-children, it's still okay to serve ads using non-certified ad networks.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. So basically, there's a lot of information that we've covered in today's webinar, both on the impact to publishers and on the impact to advertisers. We talked about some nuances in the difference between content ratings, age groups. It's a lot of information to digest, and we will be recording this. But now we have time. We have about 10 minutes for questions. If you guys want to ask any questions, please type it into the question window in the console, and we can answer them. Okay, so we have a question in regards to the QAG media ratings. So what is it, and how does it relate to age ratings in general?
So there's a slight difference. QAG media rating is a rating that has been specified by the IAB from the advertiser's perspective. The age ratings are local law-specific ratings, and they don't necessarily match. One is basically global, and the other one is very specific, again, to these local laws. So the QAG quality assurance guidelines, they offer these three options, while in the different countries, you have these very specific ones with ages of 5 to 7 and so on. But of course, the ad networks can do a broader matching so that general ads can be served to, of course, everybody.
Right. So basically, the country-specific age ratings are kind of those ones we referred to with all of those acronyms like IARC and the ESRB, and those are the ones that you see like E for everyone or T for teen, versus the QAG media rating, which is a standardized OpenRTB rating system. We have another question about examples of neutral age screens. So yeah, this word neutral is a bit tricky. So can you give us maybe a theoretical example here?
Okay, we already had the example that just tick box, I'm over 13, is not enough to be really neutral because it implies to the user that it is needed. So you effectively have to have either an age that you can select or a birth date selector, something in that regard that doesn't imply already that something will be excluding you from a use.
Can you provide an example of take an app and use it as an example to explain to us content rating versus target age group?
So very typical examples are something like a mobility provider. So you want to rent an e-scooter. So the content that you provide in the app is very, very likely not to include anything that, well, shows violence or sexual content, something in that regard. So it's suitable for everyone. On the other hand, there's usually local laws that say, hey, you need to be at least 12 or 14, or even you apply additional rules like at least you need to be 18 to use e-scooters. So in that regard, of course, your target age group is then mature, or the other examples. Another example is, of course, banking and so on.
What are the requirements for this Google certification for their ad networks?
So these are, of course, openly available on the Google page. In general, it is that you provide, as an ad network, an option to the publisher to select what creatives can be served. So you, as a publisher, determined by this neutral age screen, hey, the user is a kid, so I only want to serve ads that are actually suitable to them, so suitable to everyone. You can, in an interface, select that you only want this, and the ad network has to adhere. This is the core requirement that has to be fulfilled to be certified and on the Google certified list.
Okay, so past January 1st in California, do publishers need to request the consent of users age 13 to 16 in order to serve them targeted ads?
So this is a CCPA specific rule. There's a slight difference that you have to make. So there's, of course, the users that are up to 13. These are falling under COPPA, and then there is targeted ads anyways excluded. You can ask for consent for the users between 13 and 16, but you can also choose not to serve them targeted ads if you don't want to go the UX route, basically. Again, we come back to the trade-off that you have to make between monetization, the options, the and the user experience.
Right, but the minors that are under 16 in California, going forward, they will need to authorize the sale of their personal information, according to CCPA.
Exactly, they will have to authorize the sale. This is, of course, a larger topic, so I can refer you in this point, because it's a really large topic, more to the IAB, which recently had webinars about their CCPA framework about limited service provider contracts, which still allows certain kind of ads even though the user opted out.
Okay, I think we just have one more question. So can we give an example of a neutral age screen that we can actually see in an app? So we don't have a visual example to share with you, but for example, you could think of a drop down with the birth year that does not default to the birth year that would indicate that they're 13 or older. So for instance, you would have a drop down that has just a null value that doesn't have a value as the default. That would be one example of a neutral age screen. But if you want more information about neutral age screens, you can take a look at the FTC website specifically, as I believe both the Google Play stores and the App stores both direct to that link. If there are no more questions for today, then we'll make sure to send the recording out. And if you have anything that you think of later that you want to ask us, you can email webinars@smaato.com. Thank you, Alain, for helping us out today, and thank you to our listeners for joining us.